This short film aims to respond to the hierarchy of good that Augustine proposes in On Free Choice of the Will. Augustine differentiates between good and bad actions, saying, quote, "The difference is that the good, in desiring this, turn their love away from things that cannot be possessed without the fear of losing them. The wicked, on the other hand, try to get rid of anything that prevents them from enjoying such things securely. By putting misplaced priority on things that are temporary or passing, in other words, things that can be taken away, people will constantly be anxious about losing them and live a disordered life. Virtue, will, trust, knowledge, and most of all God cannot be taken away. This is why Augustine argues you will achieve the greatest happiness from focusing on them. On the other hand, your freedom, youth, friendships, family, and material possessions can be taken away. So trying to preserve these when it is out of your control is futile and the origin of stress." There are three main issues that I have with Augustine's argument. First is that society doesn't value internal qualities as much as it does external ones. We are pressured to care for our family and for our career goals. We aren't encouraged or correctly disposed to tap into the eternal, as Augustine describes. Second is that human nature contradicts Augustine's definition of good and bad. Aristotle claims in Politics that, quote, "Man is by nature a social animal. Anyone who either cannot lead the common life or is so self-sufficient as not to need to, and therefore does not partake of society, is either a beast or a god." In other words, we don't want to forsake friendship and family for eternal things. At least I don't. I'm sure I'm also not the only person to believe that they get the most happiness out of relationships with others, such as family and friends. Probably the happiest moments of my life are spent with other people. And lastly, in a more dramatic example of how human nature conflicts with Augustine's hierarchy of good, Augustine comes up with a pretty gruesome scenario in which a slave who kills his master is committing the act out of, quote, "inordinate desire," claiming that this form of self-defense will face, quote, "divine punishment." Watching this clip alone is a little uncomfortable because instinctually, human nature has equipped us with things like adrenaline that acts as evidence that nothing is more important than self-preservation. However, philosophy tells us that our ideas would still have been eternalized regardless. This is why Evodius settles on the claim that, quote, "How can I think that people are without inordinate desire when they fight fiercely for things that they can lose against their will? Why fight for your physical life and freedom, in other words, when the most important thing, like your ideas, will be eternalized regardless?" So Augustine's idea is a bit disturbing in this sense, but at the same time I also think that it is the clearest definition and reasonable explanation as to what can constitute good and bad so far. It's nice to know that the best way to live without fear and stress is to abandon all things temporary and nourish the mind alone. So why would one choose to go as far as murder for the sake of preserving what is in fact the source of fear and stress? The argument is very simple, and it is Aristotle's idea that humans will always chase what makes them happy, which is where I believe that Aristotle and Augustine's theories conflict. For some people, they may derive more happiness from the satisfaction of a stable lifestyle, which is stagnant and peaceful. For others, they may derive more happiness from the thrills of the ups and downs that accompany relationships. Aristotle's point leans more to the latter, that most people seek happiness in a society. But we also learn that nothing is really concrete other than Descartes' conclusion that we exist as a thinking mind and nothing more. In other words, there is no solid explanation for the way that we live. Descartes' idea sounds very similar to Aristotle, who says, quote, "Happiness then is something complete and self-sufficient, and is the end of action." We don't have an explanation for the way that we live, and we really don't need an explanation. Socrates says, quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But as Carrie Bradshaw says, quote, "But what if the examining becomes your life?" The conclusion that I've reached regarding Augustine's ideal way of living is that it requires a degree of self-control that naturally opposes human instinct. I could never in a million years follow his hierarchy over my own. In this roundabout way, I've discovered that humans are inherently bad, and following Augustine's definition, to be good means to defy our nature. But if our nature is the only thing that we know to be true thanks to Descartes, and we betray that, then is it even worth it to be good?